Hi. So today is the solemnity of the baptism of our Lord, and I'm going to be risking a little bit of baptism by fire here by opening up and discussing this particular topic. Honestly, I expect that I'm going to see an exodus of some followers, an influx of some new people, and probably definitely get some hate mail along the way. But this has actually been weighing on my heart for a little bit, and I had really been reflecting on it last night, and I wanted to kind of delve into this topic of bisexuality. So I'm going to just start this with a disclaimer. I will not be stating anything in this video that contradicts the current doctrine, catechism, stance, canon, laws of the Roman Catholic Church. If that is what you're hoping to see in this video, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to be sitting here to make an argument for why any of it should be changed. That's not the point in making this video. My point here is specifically to address people wrestling with bisexuality, not homosexuality, bisexuality, and how to live and work that into life, being a Catholic, with the doctrine being what it is. So I'm currently working on my master's degree in theology at Franciscan University. And one of the big things that's important to that school is making sure everything that is taught and everything that the students are doing lines up with the magisterium of the Roman Catholic Church. So lines up with their teachings, their interpretations, their doctrine. Students that get online and start making a bunch of content saying that that is all wrong or contesting the authority of the church to make such interpretations and such can be subject to disciplinary action at my university. So I'm not making this video to do any of that. I'm actually going to talk about what the Catechism actually says, and then considerations for bisexual people navigating life in the Roman Catholic Church. So the first thing that I'm going to start with are why this is something that is relevant to me, and I'm going to probably always spend a fair amount of time thinking about in my lifespan, is the reality that I'm not a completely heterosexual person. I'm happily married to a man that I'm very much into, but I'm not straight. It could even be argued I'm probably less straight than not, in that it's easier for me to be attracted to a woman than it is for me to be attracted to a man in a sexual way, and I'm not particularly interested in the vast majority of men that I have encountered. But I am obviously into some. This has been something that's been a tricky part of my life and faith development. I remember actually sitting in an eating disorder clinic years ago, fighting for my life. I had just broken up with a woman that I very, very much cared for and had strong feelings for. And I had a therapist tell me that if I didn't start getting honest about the fact that I wasn't straight, I wasn't going to survive. And that I needed to confront that and be honest about that within myself. And so that became like a critical part, like accepting and understanding and working within that reality became a critical part of striving towards wellness. So as I go through my education, which is essentially going through seminary, this reality is something that I live with and navigate and integrate into my my studies, my understanding of the faith. It's actually something that can be very hard for people to stomach listening to or studying if it's in any way personally relevant to them. And then a lot of times people that don't struggle with this in any way use very terrible language that just drives people away and harms the opportunity for people to develop faith. So the first thing I wanted to do was touch a little bit on what does the Catechism of the Catholic Church actually say? And what parts of that really need to be emphasized? Because it says a number of things, and a lot of times when people discuss this topic, they find the most harsh words in the setup to talk about and hyper focus on, because for a lot of people, there is this sense of like joy and vengeance and like focusing on that harshness when they know they don't struggle with it. It's a very human tendency. I've definitely seen this come up when we were in North Carolina and they tried talking about this topic at my kids' youth group. I actually ended up having to sit down the youth pastor and verbatim read him the catechism because he needed to be reminded how far off the messaging was being received by the kids. Because of overemphasizing the wrong parts of it. So the part that often gets emphasized and harped on when people are trying to talk about this are just a couple little sentences. So just for reference, if you want to pull this up yourself in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it starts Catechism 2357. This section's called Chastity and Homosexuality. So they're not referring to homosexuality as an overall, like you're just totally gay. They're referring to it as any kind of attraction or sexual interaction with someone of the same gender. They can be, so that can encompass bisexuality, even though it's not explicitly stated. So the tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. Now, people that like to talk about this a lot love to harp on that sentence because it sounds so like, yeah, see, it's like wrong. Something though that stood out to me when I was just rereading this is I wanted to point out the comparison in language. Homosexuality gets very much harped on as like one of the big box worst possible, most disordered types of sin. Like people act that way and give more of a pass to people fornicating outside of marriage. People like it's treated like it's something worse or like the root of all other evils sometimes when people talk about it, and that's just not true. And the Catechism itself supports this because if you just go back just one to 2356 referring to rape, that uses the word intrinsically too to describe what it is, but it's an intrinsically evil act. That language is not used for homosexuality in the Catechism. It is considered not in full alignment with natural law. That's the basis of it. And we believe that much of the Old Testament law that was written down is based in natural law. So that's where that wording is coming from. It's a disorder of natural law, but that same wording's used in other places for other types of actions. So masturbation is the same, like is on par in the Catechism as just like a general like manifestation of sexuality that is inherently and completely closed off to life. But people like to take this particular wording from the Catechism and like drive it home, and then they do not follow up with reading the next part, which is actually like the very important part of the Catholic doctrine on homosexuality. So the end of 2357 says that under no circumstances can homosexual actions be approved. But then 2358 goes on to say that the number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible. There are a lot of us out there. This is something that it says can constitute a trial for people trying to live in the church. And wrestling with the fact that they are fundamentally attracted to people of the same gender. But it says, and this is super important, and it's a part that a lot of people miss and don't want to hear, they must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. So when your immediate gut reaction to hearing that someone's not straight is to tell them, oh my God, homosexuality is a sin, God says that is an abomination, you are not responding with acceptance, respect, compassion, or sensitivity. Because the thing is, you don't actually have to like jump and shove that down someone's throat at every opportunity for them to be able to work on understanding why that might be part of the doctrine. And when you do it that way, you're not going to get through. But people skip this particular catechism in this kind of messaging. And it can be a very harmful way of approaching things. It says every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they're Christians, to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross the difficulties they may encounter from their condition. Now, that's a very, very interesting little specification there. So we can't go around telling gay people that aren't Christian to be living as Christ, right? That's skipping a step in there. But for those of us who are Christian and not straight, the trials that come up now, whether that be feeling persecuted because of not being straight, whether that be that there is a struggle with temptation because you're trying to be celibate or trying to be like in not engaging in a homosexual relationship, that can be a type of trial too, that if you're Christian and you experience any kind of suffering as a result of the fact that you're not straight, that you're called to unite that to Christ's suffering too. That when you suffer because you're choosing to love Christ, despite the fact that this is part of the Bible, that you're going to love him anyway and you suffer for it, that you're uniting yourself to his suffering. That's powerful and beautiful in my book, personally, as someone that does struggle with that. And then 2359 says, homosexual persons are called to chastity by the virtues of self-mastery that teach them inner freedom, at times by the support of disinterested friendship. I'm going to pause there. That just means platonic friendship. That means friendship with people that you're not trying to sleep with. By prayer and sacramental grace, they can and should gradually and resolutely approach Christian perfection. Now, this ties into the earlier video I did about how chastity is a virtue that develops over your lifetime and your virginity is not your virtue. This is talking about that. So if you read this catechism, what that's saying is that you're not expected to just like wake up one day as a bisexual or gay person and just be cool with this. Like it's understood that may be a struggle, that you may not get to a point that you're doing it supposedly perfectly the way that the church is saying you should, within like a few weeks. Like it could be something that through this gradually over the span of a lifetime might be something that settles into your heart to approach Christian perfection. But the thing is, all of us are on that journey. Like that's not just like some special assignment for people that have same-sex attraction. That's for everyone. Like we're all supposed to be gradually working down that path. So like what I take from this when I go, and there really aren't that many scriptures that reference this. And homosexuality is not anything new. It is even seen in the animal kingdom, right? Like a lot of humans are even situationally homosexual, and we see that in like seminaries and prison settings and just like confinement settings with people that have no access to people of the opposite gender. Like we will see this with animals who go into heat and then will just like be into anything, like the dog that humps a couch or a cat or your leg. Like it's like there's just like this animalistic level that like most people will throughout most of history have a certain like in certain situations there is a lot more fluidity there than people want to acknowledge. which is also why some of this wording here in the Catechism focuses on acts and tendencies more than just like a across the board static state of being. And the reality is sexuality does kind of run on a spectrum for most people. You have your people that are so straight that even if they were in prison for 10 years and never had a moment where they saw someone of the opposite gender, they would never, not even once, be okay falling into any kind of anything that goes on there. But actually that's a smaller percentage of the human population than people want to even admit to themselves, because, you know, most people never end up in those situations. Where's I going next with this? Yeah, so then there's also people that are so like homosexual that like they cannot do it at all with someone of the opposite gender. They can't, like, even if a woman were to consent to it as a lesbian, it may be highly painful and like physically painful because her body will not respond. There are men who are very gay and cannot get an erection with a woman. They can't. It's not possible. It doesn't matter how pretty she is, because they're just not wired that way. And the church does believe that people are essentially like made this way. Like, it's not really something that you can control. But for most people, most human beings fall somewhere else on that spectrum, in that a lot of people, like, and when I say most, I mean like over half, when put in certain settings, may engage in a homosexual act without wanting necessarily to identify that way or wanting to necessarily be in a relationship. And I think that one of the things we're seeing now with people being much more open about this is I think women are even more prone to it than men are. And part of that, I believe, has to do with our general history, biologically and evolutionarily speaking. If you look at the way that a lot of societies have been structured about the role of women in sexuality, like for a long time, and even nowadays in a lot of countries, women have to deal with the fact that they're not the only woman. Here in the United States, the vast majority of women have to deal with the fact that their man watches other women on the internet. And, you know, in places like there has, like, for a long time been practices of men having multiple wives or having wives and concubines. Like, that's all over the Bible if you want to like talk about biblical historical marriage. And so the whole concept of we have of like, oh my goodness, this whole idea of homosexuality must be new, or that bisexuality is new, I don't necessarily think is true. We have evidence going way back that there haven't been very many like open homosexual relationships, but they have been things that have existed for a long time. And I also think that there's some evidence that in certain eras that there has been orgies are nothing new. If they were, they wouldn't be mentioned so many times in the Bible, right? Like, we want to like think that everyone that lived historically was like super prudish and like didn't have sex except under these like perfectly rigid circumstances, but history doesn't actually support that. And so if you take that into consideration and you think about how often women throughout history have had to tolerate being one of several, I think you're being very naive if you don't think that women have historically in these situations for millennia at points in time been asked to engage in some level of mildly bisexual attraction, if not overt homosexual activity. The idea of a threesome's nothing new, and if polygamy has been happening this long, I think that we're kind of being naive about how that played out. And so when you think about that, I think that just as like we can make arguments about the dating strategies that have developed for women, for many women, I think throughout history, having a level of acceptance of bisexuality was likely a survival mechanism, and it is nowadays too. Because so many men struggle these days with monogamy themselves, for women to, it's almost like a way for them to, if they can openly embrace it, it's almost like a way to be guarded against that, in terms of how much that might hurt their hearts. Like, we've been doing this as women for literally thousands of years. So I just think that now the difference is, like, there's some social feedback and allowance for saying it publicly, for being blatant about the attraction, to openly stating, yeah, that girl's hot. But I think that, like, if you're like really gonna get honest about assessing, like, this isn't something brand new. We're just louder about it right now. And I think that, and this isn't just like, some of this isn't just opinions I make. I wrote one of my major papers in college was assessing the process of homosexuality being shifted from having been viewed as a mental illness to being accepted as a valid sexual orientation. So, like, you know, that whole bit I was talking about the spectrum of sexuality was actually something I discussed in that paper and research. I'm not just like making that part up, but the evolutionary part, that's just a theory that I'm pulling together from what I've read about sexual history in general. So from here on out, I'm going to be primarily addressing just the bisexual people. I'm not gay. I have very strong leanings towards being predominantly attracted to women, but I'm not gay. And there are definitely some men that I am into and happily enjoy sexual relations with, if I am connected enough to them. If any guy's ever made it to that point, he should feel kind of lucky, frankly. So something to consider, and this is hard to like articulate, I think, without triggering some people, but something to consider: bisexual people, when it comes to advocating for gay people within the church, are trying to jump on the ship, because they have the choice to be with a man or woman, depending on their gender. My primary audience is women. So, you know, like, they have the option to have a heterosexual marriage, but they want to be given the option to have a gay marriage if they want to. Even if they're perfectly capable of experiencing attraction to opposite gender. And it's like on this grounds of, well, I'm just not going to care about the gender, I'm going to care about the person. So I'm talking to these people, this subset, because it's a different discussion when you're talking about someone who's like legitimately homosexual, across the board, cannot even get it up for someone of the opposite gender. Like, that's different than the viewpoint of someone who is into both. Because one of these people has a legitimate option for choice and the other doesn't. You can't choose whether or not you experience that attraction, but you can choose who you're in a relationship with. So, as I said earlier, in the Catechism 2357, it says, under no circumstances should homosexual relationships be approved. So this, I think, honestly, should be seen as less sticky when dealing with bisexual people. Simply because you've been given a privilege in that you can choose to opt in to the marital structure of the church, be fully included. You do not have to be persecuted in that way. Doing so is like, you're choosing that for the sake of a person, which someone might choose to do, but it's something that should be assessed a little differently when about your motivations, if you really do have a choice in the gender of the partner that you end up with. From my perspective, like, my understanding of the Catechism, of the theology on marriage, my own experiences with going to confession. And yeah, I have gone to confession for having sex with a woman. I've never been shamed or degraded by a priest in the confessional. I've never been like told that I was bad or evil or anything like that. I was encouraged to live chastely, but just it wasn't that it was a non-issue, right? Because if it's a non-issue, you don't have to go to confession for it, but they weren't going to treat me any differently. And this was even true of people who held significant authority, because the confessional is a place of love and mercy. It is the place where you're supposed to feel that reconciliation with God because something in you wanted to come and seek that mercy. And so like I have struggled, right, in these areas I've talked about before, that I've struggled with chastity in general. And I've never experienced a priest shaming me in the confessional for coming and talking about this. And so I think that that's just like something to remember. Like you can like honestly like sit and like understand these positions on an intellectual level and still struggle with the realities. And the thing is, there's always supposed to be love and mercy. There's supposed to be respect and compassion and sensitivity for the fact that this is something that our brains are wired a little differently for. And we have to learn to navigate that while still trying to love God and fulfill his will for our life. A question that I've seen come up in like some marriage groups for Catholics and stuff, is whether or not a person who's bisexual can marry someone of the opposite gender. And this seems to go hand in hand with a common misconception that a person who's bisexual can't be monogamous, or if they are monogamous, they weren't really bisexual, they were just gay or straight. And that just kind of dismisses the fact that temptation is often mental, it's internal. One can have the discipline to control their sexual actions while still experiencing temptation. But that can be true of men or women. Men are always wrestling with this. I mean, the porn industry wouldn't have so much money if people didn't wrestle with visual temptation. It's a choice. It's a choice, whether you are gay or straight or bisexual. It is a choice you make to honor your wedding vows and to keep them to the person that you're with. It's your choice to be chaste in that way. And so if you're capable of finding a person of the opposite gender as a bisexual person that you can enjoy going to bed with, that you like to cuddle with them and spend time with them and you love them, yeah, you can absolutely get married to someone of the opposite gender. And that doesn't necessarily change the fact that you experience those attractions, and that's something you're gonna have to like perhaps wrestle with at times as you maintain your vows. But you can still, you have the ability to overcome that temptation if it arises. The misconception that someone being bisexual means that they're incapable of having self-control and being faithful to someone is actually just super toxic. And people who are both gay and straight tend to have that mentality, and that's just not true. A person can absolutely choose to be faithful to the person they're with. The key thing here, though, on whether or not a bisexual person can marry someone of the opposite gender really hinges on the genuine attraction to that person. So like for me, I'm not attracted to a lot of guys. I was actually like reflecting on this really heavily. In my walk in life, I'm going to be much more likely to be heavily tempted by a beautiful woman than I am by a attractive man. Like I can be surrounded by very conventionally attractive men and it doesn't feel sexually appealing to me. But I don't react that way if I'm surrounded by scantily clad attractive women. It feels very different. I actually can have a lot of sympathy for the struggles that men in our society go through with like pornography and the fact that women love to wear next to nothing, because of that reality of my sexuality. I'm not going to get all hot and bothered because a young Brad Pitt lookalike is standing around with his shirt off. But there are some men for whom I have been able to be attracted to, and it's usually because there's something about their personality that I like, and I can absolutely enjoy sexual relations with a man as long as that connection is there, that sense of like enjoying who he is. And that's important. If you can't do that, you might be more gay than bisexual than you'd like to admit. But you absolutely should not ever marry someone that you're not into. And this, I mean, this whole talk isn't geared towards gay people, but under no circumstances should a gay person marry someone of the opposite gender. That is cruel to yourself. That is cruel to your spouse. Do not do it. I don't care if the Catechism says that it's disordered to be gay. You cannot force yourself into that kind of marriage and hurt another person like that. No. But if you are bisexual enough that you can genuinely find someone of the opposite gender that you are into sexually, that there's no reason, like this idea has to like be buried, that because someone has attraction to both genders that they can't be married or they can't be faithful, because they can. The same could easily be said for any straight man, right? That maybe he's not capable of being faithful because of the statistics of adultery and porn use and whatever, but like, it's a choice. It really is. So something to think about, though, this is so important, is vetting. When you are bisexual and you decide, okay, I'm going to get married and I'm going to get married in a heterosexual marriage because I'm going to be trying to live as a faithful Roman Catholic. You have to vet for acceptance. So you cannot be in a marriage with someone who's going to tell you all the time how sinful homosexuality is, or that something is intrinsically wrong with you because you've experienced that, or like you cannot be with someone that holds that idea in their head. They have to accept that that's part of who you are. It can't be something that bothers them. It can't be something that makes them think that you are less than. Acceptance is critical. And what you may unfortunately find is that it may be hard to find someone within the church, someone who grew up in the church that feels that way. You might have better luck finding Christ-like love and acceptance outside of the church and trying to bring that person in. That's the path I took. And I was like talking with my husband about it today. Like, honestly, being who I am this strange combination of like, I am ridiculously over the top about my religion. Like, I love studying it. It's something I'm literally going to school for. But at the same time, I don't fit the profile of your typical cradle Catholic, super churchy person. If I had to be in a position to remarry, if I was widowed, like, it would be a real thing that I might have to seriously be looking outside the church for a partner to lead them into the church again. Simply because I have found it's very difficult to find cradle Catholics that are comfortable accepting someone who is like me. And that's, everyone has their own preferences. But for people that are vetting, trying to find a partner, even if your faith is very important to you, for the sake of your marriage being actually based on a sense of mutual respect and love, you have to vet for a person that they're going to accept that this struggle will be part of your lives together. That you may experience, just as he may experience lust occasionally towards another woman, so might you. And if he thinks you're disgusting or evil because of that, the marriage is never going to work. That is like the most important thing to consider when you are vetting for a heterosexual marriage as a bisexual person. And you know what? I think that might be a little unfair, but I think that women might have an easier time finding men who are okay with that than men will have finding women who are okay with them being bisexual. But I think there are probably more bisexual women than men in the first place. So maybe it balances out. I don't know. The biggest thing though I think people struggle with is how to integrate into the church. If you're not straight, it's hard. Like a lot of people can't handle it because they can't handle applying these sorts of discussions to themselves in their own lives. And the straight people can be very aggressive and condescending with how they approach it. So I would say the first thing, if you're bisexual, but you're in a heterosexual relationship, this is pretty much a non-issue. I mean, like if you find yourself still struggling with like looking at pictures of naked women, it's like stuff like that. Like you go to confession like any straight person would do, like the guys are supposed to do when they're looking at porn. It's the same thing. But if you're in an otherwise like valid heterosexual marriage that is accepted by the church, there really isn't anything that you should be precluded from or restricted from in any way, shape, or form just because you also have attraction to the same gender. Because it's not about just the fact that you have your brain wired this way, but what you're choosing to do in terms of actions. Something you should really do to help with your integration into the church is be grateful that you have a legitimate choice, that you can make the choice to live in a relationship that you don't have to be persecuted for. That's a privilege, and that's a privilege that authentically gay people do not have in the Catholic Church. So if you're bisexual, you should be grateful that you even have the option. And then you should also think about how you can use these tendencies to have a deeper compassion and understanding for your spouse. So for me as a woman, what this means is that I find I understand men a lot better than a lot of women do because I understand their sexuality a little better. This makes it easier for me to understand, I guess, the types of temptations that men face in the very hypersexualized society that we have. And this allows me to try to have like more compassion for my own husband in his own struggles, which are not unique. Like they're so common. Like we don't talk about them openly enough, but it's just, they're common things that most people in our society deal with. And if you are, if you're bisexual and you're a person who's already acted on it, perhaps, and you're moving out of that like stage in your life, like you can still take some of those experiences that you had in the past and try to let that give you more grace and compassion and love and acceptance for the person that you're with, a deeper understanding perhaps of how they navigate the world. I know that that's something that has been important for me. It's definitely important to not try to pretend that you're not, whether you're gay or bi, it's important to try to not pretend that you're just totally straight, just because that is inauthentic. That's creating a life for yourself built on a lie, and it's very hard to have a healthy faith relationship and good friendships, meaningful relationships with anybody, even a spouse, if you're not honest about who you are. We know conversion therapy doesn't work. So this is one of those things that it's like you have to learn to accept it within yourself and live your life. So for people that are already in a relationship or they're married and you're just suddenly awakening to the reality that you might be bi, okay, like it doesn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be a big thing. I mean, I know a number of Christian women that you would probably be surprised are not straight, and they're not straight. They're heterosexually married and they're faithful to their husbands, and they have at some point come to the realization that they experience some level of attraction towards women. And then they just let it go and continue being faithful to their husband and living out their life. Just because you acknowledge it doesn't mean you have to act on it. It doesn't have to be some earth-shattering thing. It doesn't mean that you are just like a bad person. If you have those concerns about yourself, acknowledge it and let it go. it's going to be much better for you that way. If you are already in a homosexual relationship with someone, well, you get to ask yourself some really big questions here. If you're bisexual, already in a homosexual relationship, or even gay, honestly, this applies, the same thing. So the first thing you need to ask yourself, do you love this human being enough to give up communion for them? If not, reevaluate your relationship. So when I say this as someone that had been excommunicated for a heterosexual marriage, like I didn't get to receive communion for 12 months because I married a man. Right. So this isn't even like this isn't something that just gay people are subjected to. Like I entered into a heterosexual marriage and got excommunicated. So when you're going to do something like that, you need to ask yourself if you love that person enough to not take communion for them. I would say that rarely that is something that is something that might make sense in someone's life, that they make that decision. The problem comes in when people get all up in arms because it's like, no, I want to receive communion, even though they're choosing to not live in communion with the Catholic doctrine, which is why I got excommunicated, right? I was choosing to get married outside of their laws and their guidelines. You have to ask yourself also, do you love going to Mass enough to go, even if you can't receive communion? If you love your faith enough to be willing to go to Mass, even if you have been excommunicated because you're in a marriage that isn't recognized by the church and may never be, then maybe you love this person enough to like consider making those sacrifices and your faith is strong enough to take it. But if not, you probably should not civilly marry that person if you do not think that they mean so much to you that you could comfortably and lovingly live that way. It's a hard cross to bear to be excommunicated like that. And we can sit and complain about how maybe that's not fair, but I'm not here to argue about the theology and the doctrine and those decisions. They are what they are right now. And I'm more worried about helping people who are not straight figure out how to navigate the current situation. I don't think that being gay or bisexual is a reason to not be part of the church. I don't think that the doctrine encourages that. I think that it presents complexities. It presents unique crosses to bear that other people aren't going to have to handle. But it's not a reason to walk away. And no matter what, chastity is something that develops over the lifespan. If you're not there yet, you're struggling, you're not, you hear this and you're like, there is no way in hell I am going to stop like dating people of the same gender. I still don't think that that means that you're called to walk away from the church or walk away from Christ, right? Because we know that virtue develops gradually over the span of a lifetime. So you can come as you are, and there's grace and love and mercy and sensitivity and acceptance. And if you find at a specific parish that's not the case, go find a better one. But you're still called to God's kingdom and his love, even if you're still currently at a place where you're not ready to give that up. I'm going to quote this wrong, but it is a St. Augustine quote. It was something like he was going to pray for celibacy, but not today, right? Even if that's your attitude, God still loves you. There's still a place for you. And don't let some of the people that just don't get it push you out. We want you here. Anyway, I hope everyone has a happy Sunday, and I'll talk to you soon.